I find myself in a somewhat unique situation and was curious if anyone else has experienced something similar. I want to clarify that I am not the victim here. The victims in this situation are my husband, my children, and my parents, who are bearing the weight of my past mistakes, for which I am genuinely remorseful. To be direct, 19 months ago, I was discovered to be having an affair with a married neighbor and a father of 3. I'm a 32-year-old woman. My husband is 39, and the neighbor in question, whom I'll call Steve for privacy, was 27 at the time. This affair started a little over 2 years ago. Although the affair continued for nearly 5 months before being uncovered, I was physically with Steve only 4 times in total. I understand that readers here may have doubts, but I swear this is the truth. Now, I'll address the questions about my marriage that I'm sure many of you have. Were we experiencing marital problems? Did I not love my husband? Was I unhappy? The answer to all of these is a resounding no. I was genuinely happy and content in my marriage, and I love my husband and our 2 sons, ages 9 and 11, more than anything in the world. I felt emotionally, mentally, and physically fulfilled by John. He was everything I had ever dreamed of and more. My misplaced attraction to Steve stemmed from a deep place within me, reminiscent of my first romantic encounter when I was 18. It was an intense attraction, much like my first experience. During high school, I casually dated 4 boys, but nothing serious beyond a quick goodnight kiss. In fact, I considered all those guys as friends, since we had all grown up together. Then, one day, I was invited to a barbecue hosted by my friend's parents. It was there that I met Charles, who happened to be my friend's cousin. From the moment I laid eyes on him, I was captivated. At that time, he was 20, and I was 18. Our connection was immediate, and there was an inexplicable attraction that drew me to him like a magnet to metal. We began talking at the barbecue, and when he had to leave for work, we exchanged phone numbers. The following day, on Sunday, we met for ice cream in the evening and took a stroll. We talked for hours, completely engrossed in each other's company, and we spontaneously began kissing. He invited me to his apartment, and there, I had my first experience. It was magical, exceeding all my expectations. Something about Charles excited me in a way that made me want to give myself completely to him. Even to this day, I struggle to put it into words. It was a subconscious attraction that I couldn't resist. Apart from the physical aspect, we had absolutely no common ground. In reality, we were quite incompatible. I ended my relationship with Charles 11 months later when the initial passion dwindled. A year after that, I met my current husband, John. While the sparks didn't ignite as quickly as they did with Charles, over time, I developed a deep love for John that surpassed anything I had ever experienced. He ticked all the boxes for me, and I knew he was the one. We got married a year later, and our marriage brought 13 years of happiness until I ruined it. We were blessed with 2 wonderful boys who resemble their dad and inherit his fantastic personality. I've shared these details because they relate to why I got involved in an affair with Steve. Steve and his wife, let's call her Erica, moved into our neighborhood. They were the youngest couple in the community and were warmly welcomed by our neighbors. Surprisingly, my husband and I are the second youngest couple, with the rest of our neighbors in their 40s, 50s, and even a few in their 60s. Steve and Erica were invited to a neighborhood picnic, and that's where he and I first locked eyes. It gave me the same vibe I had when I first met Charles at that family barbecue years ago. The next time our eyes met was at the car dealership where Steve worked in finance. We were in the market for a new SUV, so my husband found out at the picnic that Steve worked there, and they naturally started chatting. We visited the dealership the following week to check out cars. Steve made sure we got a good deal, and he secured us excellent financing. During the process, Steve and I exchanged glances, though my husband didn't notice. A few days later, I had to return to the dealership to have mud flaps installed, and it was there that Steve and I had our first inappropriate encounter. When he saw me in the waiting area, he came out to greet me. He asked me to join him in his office, claiming there was additional financing information to discuss. We sat down, had coffee, and chatted, similar to my interactions with Charles. Then he abruptly confessed that he wanted to speak to me privately about his feelings for me. He mentioned feeling a strong connection and said he had noticed my glances. I told him I felt something too. But it was wrong. He acknowledged the wrongness but didn't care. He expressed his desire for me. Fast forward to the following morning, when we had our first intimate encounter at his house after our kids went to school and our spouses left for work. By the way, John has a good job, and Erica is a licensed nurse. As I mentioned, Steve and I only engaged in closeness 4 times over the course of those 5 months. There was no love or emotional connection between us. I truly loved John, and Steve loved Erica. Our relationship was purely physical, and to be honest, it didn't compare to the physical connection I had with my husband. Not even close. However, the forbidden nature of our affair made it thrilling and enticing, I suppose. Looking back now, I believe my 11-year stint as a stay-at-home mom left me craving the attention I received from this younger, attractive man. I thought I could have this secret adventure for a while and still maintain a loving and fulfilling marriage with John. But that illusion came crashing down one Thursday morning, 19 months ago. That's when Steve and I were discovered in bed at his house by Erica's mother. She walked in on us while we were fully engaged and immediately started screaming obscenities. She first slapped and scratched Steve on the face, leaving a deep gash with her nails. She also struck me squarely on the jaw and forcefully yanked out 2 handfuls of my hair before I could gather my clothes and flee the house. When I returned home, I was in a state of total shock, and the gravity of my actions hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew my fairy tale marriage with John was forever altered and could potentially end because of this. I sat in silence for hours, staring at the walls, contemplating how to break the news to my husband. Eventually, I mustered the courage to call him and left an urgent message, stressing the importance of our conversation. He didn't respond, so I sent a text but still received no reply. At that moment, I suspected that Erica, or possibly even Steve, had already reached out to him. Shortly thereafter, Erica and her mother showed up at our doorstep, banging on the door and the bay window, demanding that I answer. They hurled obscenities and insisted they knew I was inside. I was terrified beyond words and deeply embarrassed. Thankfully, my boys were at school during this ordeal. Eventually, they left, and I collapsed on the couch, weeping. I dozed off briefly and was jolted awake by the sound of a car door in the driveway. I peered outside and spotted my husband. In a panic, I rushed to the bathroom to freshen up and looked at myself in the mirror. Then, I returned to the living room to greet him when he opened the door. However, instead of entering, I saw him through the window as he walked down the street towards Steve and Erica's house. I watched him go and saw that he remained there for nearly 3 hours before returning home. When he returned home, I approached him for a hug, but he pushed me away. I began to apologize, but he made it clear that he didn't accept my apology and insisted that I leave immediately. I collapsed to the floor, crying and begging, expressing my reluctance to go, but he remained firm. He then phoned my mother, informed her about my actions, and asked her to come over and pick me up. My mom arrived and, after apologizing to Steve, persuaded me to return to her house for the night. She helped me pack some clothes and I left, tearfully inquiring about what John would tell the kids. John assured me that he would handle it, and with a heavy heart and a sense of shame, I departed. That night I called John, and to my surprise he answered. However, his response was brief, and he simply greeted me before falling silent. I identified myself and profusely apologized, vowing never to repeat such a mistake. I also expressed my commitment to spend the rest of my life making amends. John remained silent and eventually asked if I had anything more to say. I replied negatively and asked about his feelings. He responded with, "You know what I'm feeling," and I burst into tears. He then conveyed his desire for me to stay at my parents' house for a couple of weeks before returning home. Reluctantly, I agreed, but inquired about when I could see him and the boys again. He admitted that he didn't want to see me at the moment, but consented to a brief phone call with me every evening at 9 p.m. Our first call ended with me saying, "I love you," and John hanging up without a response. Our subsequent calls followed a similar pattern. I offered apologies and John remained silent until I finished speaking. Then he dropped a bombshell. He wanted a divorce. Hearing this, I felt crushed and pleaded with him for another chance. He declined my plea and mentioned that he knew he'd have to split his hard-earned assets in a divorce. Strangely, in the next breath, he offered to give me everything he owned if I would simply disappear and leave him and the boys alone. I broke down and told him he didn't mean it, but he insisted that he did. Our call ended, and I spent the entire night in tears. That's when I began devising a plan to propose a post-nuptial agreement that would be so favorable to him that he couldn't refuse it. All I wanted was a second chance to prove my love to him, regardless of the cost. In the following week, while John was meeting with his divorce attorney, I too consulted a divorce attorney. However, my purpose wasn't to prepare for divorce. It was to craft a post-nuptial agreement to propose to John before I received the divorce papers. I consulted with 4 different attorneys before finding one who specialized in post-nuptial agreements and was willing to create a one-sided agreement. By one-sided, I mean an agreement where my husband would receive most of the benefits in exchange for staying married to me for a specified duration, giving me a second chance at love. Unfortunately, John's attorney managed to complete the divorce papers in just 11 days, and I was served at my parents' house. 2 days later, I had John served with the proposed postnuptial agreement. We had a conversation that night after he reviewed the proposal. He seemed somewhat surprised by what I had offered, and for the first time, I sensed the caring person I once knew emerging, not the cold and robotic man he had been for the past 2 weeks. From both a financial and personal perspective, the agreement is highly advantageous for John and offers me an opportunity to prove my worth to him. I won't delve into the specific details of the post-nuptial agreement, but I can confirm that it grants John the majority of our marital assets if we remain married and living together for at least 30 months. Furthermore, if I were to be unfaithful again and we ended up divorcing, I would forfeit any claims to our marital assets, receiving nothing, and waive any entitlement to alimony and child support payments. The agreement also stipulates that I must secure a full-time job within the next 6 months and contribute appropriately to our household expenses. Lastly, my husband is allowed to see other women if he chooses to do so during the remainder of our marriage. I know John would never be unfaithful. It's not in his character. However, I wanted to show him that I love him enough to offer him this option. To my surprise and delight, John accepted the offer with one additional condition. He requested that we add a clause stating that there is no obligation for us to engage in any form of marital intimacy or to sleep together for the rest of our marriage. I was initially saddened and reluctant to agree, but eventually acquiesced, believing that over time I would regain his respect, trust, and love. Things haven't unfolded as I had anticipated, which brings me here. We are now 17.5 months into what I refer to as our second marriage, and our relationship is more like that of housemates raising our boys. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful every day for the second chance I've been given. However, our current situation doesn't quite fit the definition of a traditional marriage. It feels more like 2 divorced individuals cohabiting. Since my affair, John has completely withdrawn any signs of affection from me, not even a simple kiss or hug. There have been times when I've managed to sneak in a hug or kiss before he pushes me away, but it's clear he's uncomfortable with it, so I don't attempt it often. In addition, he insists on monthly at-home STD testing. Furthermore, since the affair, John refuses to be seen with me in public, even at family gatherings. When it's my turn to attend our boys' games, he shows up but avoids sitting with me. Instead, he mingles with other fathers on the sidelines as if I don't exist. The only occasions we go out together are when we travel or go on vacations, which we do frequently. During our travels, he arranges adjoining rooms with 2 queen beds each. Our boys stay in one room and we stay in the other, sleeping in separate beds. I eagerly anticipate these trips because it's when we are physically closest, and I've almost felt a connection with him during these times. I've mentioned this to John and suggested relocating to a new neighborhood, believing it could help us start fresh. However, John adamantly refuses and insists that he'll only consider moving if he receives a job promotion that requires relocation. Otherwise, he plans to stay in our current home until our boys finish high school. Our sons are also against moving because all their friends live nearby, as do all of John's friends. Speaking of friendships, I lost all my neighborhood friendships after the affair. Steve and Erica divorced 8 months after the revelation, but Erica and her children still reside in their home down the street. The neighborhood women I was once close to have essentially cut ties with me and hold me responsible for breaking up Erica and Steve's family. Consequently, my home has become somewhat isolating. When I'm here, I rarely venture outside and mostly stay indoors or tend to my backyard garden. Meanwhile, my boys continue to enjoy their neighborhood activities, often having friends over, including Erica and Steve's kids. Fortunately, their world hasn't been drastically affected. John follows a similar routine, maintaining close friendships with the neighborhood men. They gather at our house to enjoy cigars and bourbon on the back porch or at one of their homes. John's daily routine usually consists of work, the gym, and returning home. He prepares his own meals and refuses to eat anything I cook, although he did sneak a few cookies I made recently. On weekends, he takes charge of the grill and exclusively eats what he cooks, avoiding my dishes entirely. Having weekday dinners with my boys has become a wonderful bonding experience for us. They prefer to eat shortly after returning from school, so the three of us typically have dinner around 4 p.m. I have everything prepared, and they assist in setting the table, helping with final food preparation, and participating in cleanup after dinner. I truly value this time as it has brought us closer and taught them valuable skills. They even lend a hand in our garden, where we've transformed our backyard with landscaping. To sum it up, some aspects of my life are genuinely positive, while others are undeniably challenging. I suppose this is my way of asking whether you believe it's worth continuing this marriage in its current state, or if I should release John now and provide him the financial benefits as if he had stayed with me. Deep down, I know he's not happy. How could he be? It's evident that he no longer sees me as his wife or lover, only as a co-parent. And we do excel at that role, by the way. I love John deeply, and will carry the heavy burden of what I did to him for the rest of my life. My greatest desire is to return to the loving relationship we once shared, but I doubt he will allow us to reach that point. I'm eager to hear your thoughts on what I should do, and would greatly appreciate any suggestions on how to successfully regain my husband's love and trust after such a blatant betrayal. First update. 7 weeks later, I've returned to provide an update on my situation. Last month, I followed the advice given by several of you and decided to move out of the house temporarily to give our marriage some space. I secured a short-term rental for a nicely furnished apartment nearby, and have been living there since. While I miss being in the same house as my husband and boys, along with my garden, leaving that neighborhood has been a relief. It's filled with so many painful memories and negative vibes, all of which I know are my fault. I'm not trying to excuse what I caused in any way. When I informed John of my decision, he seemed surprised and somewhat saddened, asking many questions. His reaction spoke volumes to me, indicating that he still loves me. I could see it in his eyes. I pick up my boys after school, and they join me for dinner and spend the night a few days a week. John and I are flexible about this arrangement, and the kids are aware they can come and go between our places as they please. The primary challenge I face now is that, since I'm no longer at home, I don't get to see John much at all. I'm not in a situation where I can have direct conversations with him, so I find myself calling him with trivial questions several times a week just to stay connected. Lately, we've had some lengthy discussions about various topics, which is a sign that he still cares about me. I can say with certainty that I love him. That's all for now. Final update. 5 months after the last update. I've taken my time to come back and provide an update because I wanted to ensure I could offer a comprehensive perspective on my situation. What a journey it has been. A real roller coaster. Life certainly has its highs and lows. Let's start with the downside. After 2 years into our second marriage, John decided that it would be best for us to get a divorce. John mentioned that while he still has feelings for me and envisions the possibility of rekindling a romantic relationship in the future, he feels unable to do so while we're still married. I don't completely understand his reasoning, but he explained that it's a psychological matter. He believes that while we're married, he continues to feel disrespected and betrayed. But after the divorce, he thinks he can let go of those emotions. He likened it to dating again, and even promised that we would celebrate our divorce when it's finalized, possibly spending the night together. I know this might sound like an unusual way to divorce without guilt, but if it means I can keep this man in my life as my partner, lover, and friend, I'm willing to consider it. If we do reconnect, John has made it clear that we won't remarry. He believes that if we truly love each other, a legal contract isn't necessary. I share his sentiment, though I wish there were an alternative to divorce. Regarding the divorce, I've willingly agreed to let him keep 75% of our marital assets, even though he didn't fulfill the conditions in the post-nuptial agreement. I also won't be pursuing alimony or child support from him. I understand that some women may criticize my generosity, but I genuinely feel he earned the money and would have willingly given it all to me if I had remained faithful. I'm at peace with this decision. Even with the reduced settlement, I'll be able to comfortably support myself for the next 8 years or more, although I'm currently working, which puts me in an even better position. In closing, I want to express my gratitude to those who provided responses. Your words have significantly influenced my actions and supported me through this challenging period. Before I conclude, I'd like to offer some advice to women who struggle with controlling their impulses, as I clearly did. My advice is to resist. Don't give in. The excitement of a momentary thrill is not worth the long-term loss of love, respect, and trust. If you find it difficult to control yourself, seek professional help. I can assure you, based on my experience, that the temporary high is not worth the enduring consequences. Best wishes to all.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
Story 2. My wife and I celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary. We have 2 children, a 14-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son. About 18 months ago, my wife approached me with an unusual request for an open marriage. She expressed feeling unfulfilled with just the 2 of us and wanted to explore other possibilities. I mean, feeling bored? Why not take up a new hobby, get a dog, or plan some travels? Opening up your marriage to others isn't a typical solution. Does it seem like she still loves her spouse? Clearly not, and these situations rarely lead to positive outcomes. In such cases, divorce should have been considered. I strongly objected to this idea. I firmly believe that marriage is a commitment between 2 people, as we vowed when we got married. However, it's worth noting that when we tied the knot, I had been in 5 previous relationships, whereas my wife had only been with me. Seriously, do you honestly believe you're her one and only? Don't deceive yourself. She made it crystal clear that if we didn't open the marriage, she was ready to file for divorce. Well, in that case, so be it. It's not happening. Neither of us wanted that outcome, so I reluctantly agreed, but I established certain conditions. We must keep our partners discreet, and our children and family should remain unaware of them. We ensure that all our partners undergo testing beforehand, and we avoid anyone from our shared social circles. I strongly suspected that my wife had someone specific in mind, and my suspicions were confirmed within 24 hours of reaching an agreement. She went out and didn't return until 4 o'clock in the morning. It was evident she had found someone else. It was difficult for me to accept, and I wasn't okay with it, but I hoped to save my marriage. Saving the marriage by allowing her to connect with other men and potentially replace me? That was the plan, man. That's why I took this course of action. In May of last year, I met Amber. Our daughters are both in the same marching band. Amber is divorced and has no interest in remarrying, but like anyone else, she has her needs. So 5 months after opening up the marriage, I started a physical relationship with Amber. It took this guy 5 months of seeing his wife go out and connect with other men to finally realize how challenging it can be for men to find casual hookups. It's not as straightforward for men unless they're in the top percentage of attractiveness. At first, it felt like infidelity, but honestly, having something with no commitments where neither of us wanted to take it further was a relief. Gradually, I became comfortable with the idea that my wife and I could fulfill our needs both within and outside our marriage. Surprisingly, it improved our bed life and made us somewhat happier. Trust me, if you call this happiness, you might be mistaken. No, we weren't genuinely happy. My wife stopped seeing her other partner, whom I've never met, in April during the coronavirus pandemic. In May, we helped set up a Zoom concert for the kids' band, and it went smoothly. During this event, my wife met Amber for the first time. It turns out that Amber had openly discussed her situation with a few of the moms, and somehow this information reached my wife, revealing Amber as my outside partner. It seems she's been having conversations, at least according to your wife. My wife informed me that both of us are acquainted with Amber and suggested I end things with her. I declined, explaining that neither of us knew Amber before, and our meeting didn't violate the rules we established. Over the past month, she has repeatedly expressed discomfort with my continued involvement with Amber and insisted I terminate the arrangement. It's interesting how her insistence on ending things with Amber coincides with her inability to see her own lover. It's worth noting that she was perfectly fine with this a year ago when she had her partner. This weekend, she approached me and expressed her desire to close the marriage again. I told her I was open to it as long as we both agreed to keep it closed moving forward. She concurred, claiming she didn't need any more partners and was content with just me. It sounds questionable. Honestly, this happened during COVID, and I can bet that once circumstances change, she'll go back to her previous ways. I informed her that we could agree to close the marriage under 2 conditions. The first condition, as I mentioned earlier. The second one involved her signing a document renouncing spousal support in case of a divorce. Now, this caught her attention. She strongly reacted, outright refusing to even consider it. My wife has been a stay-at-home mom and hasn't held a job since we got married, she argued. She insisted that I could continue seeing Amber and leave her with nothing. In response, I proposed that if she signed it, we could include a list of mutually agreed-upon scenarios, including situations like infidelity on my part, where the agreement would become void. She wasn't willing to miss her opportunity to secure financial support. No chance. And let's not forget who initiated this entire situation in the first place. Her. She's adamant that it's not up for discussion, expressing her unwillingness to endure continued infidelity and be left with nothing when I eventually choose Amber over her. Infidelity? It was her idea to open up the marriage in the first place. She insisted on it, even threatening divorce if I didn't comply with the plan. Can she really blame me for finding someone better? I pointed out that this whole situation was her idea, and I only went along with it to save our marriage. She argued that if we don't close the marriage, it might as well be over. In response, she accused me of being overly dramatic and urged me to refocus on our relationship. It's remarkable, isn't it? How she twists things around, always casting the guy as the villain, regardless of the circumstances, and her complete lack of accountability. She's the one who created this mess, and I'm willing to bet she'd say something like, I had to do this because you weren't a good husband. You weren't taking me out, doing this, and this. It's a no-win situation. No wonder guys are avoiding marriage and relationships these days. Update. So following some comments I received this morning, I reached out to Amber and reminded her about our agreement to keep our relationship low-key. I asked if she had shared any details about us with others. She denied spilling the beans, and I didn't sense any dishonesty there. However, when I checked my wife's Google timeline history, I found proof that she had trailed me to Amber's place back in April. She intentionally followed me and introduced herself to Amber, likely aiming to stir up trouble. Initially, I thought she genuinely wanted to connect with other band parents, but it seems her real motive was to create chaos. Now I'm unsure about my next steps. In other words, she tracked down Amber, introduced herself, and now she can claim she knows her, saying we agreed not to get involved with people we know, which is causing problems, as he mentions. Update. Initially, my wife proposed an open marriage, which I was against, but eventually agreed to. Within just 24 hours, she found a partner, although they broke up a few months later. She tracked my activities, introduced herself to my partner, and tried to pressure me into ending the relationship. When that tactic didn't work, she demanded we close the marriage once more. I laid out some conditions, which she wasn't willing to accept. Now, let's delve into the past month, which has been quite challenging. During this time, I confronted my wife about her stalking behavior. Initially, she denied it, but I presented evidence from her location history. Her initial reaction is typically to deny things. She has a tendency to be untruthful. She attempted to deflect blame, accusing me of invading her privacy, but I didn't buy into that. It's interesting how she tries to twist things and make it seem like it's the guy's fault. How about the fact that she didn't respect his privacy, or the vows they made 15 years ago? Eventually, she admitted that she didn't like the fact that I had someone on the side while she didn't, and she found it uncomfortable that a mom from the school was involved. That's the real issue here. She couldn't have her guy, so she didn't want this guy to have someone either. We reached an agreement. I would end my relationship with Amber, and in return, she would agree to counseling, permanently close the marriage, and start looking for a job to contribute to our household expenses. That was the line she crossed, and I couldn't accept it. I discussed the idea of her getting a job, and she replied that she's a stay-at-home mom. I explained that it's something we can revisit once the COVID situation improves. When things return to normal, it's not feasible for her to continue as a stay-at-home mom, especially with two teenagers, aged 15 and 14, who don't require that level of attention. We attended a few therapy sessions, and at first, things appeared to be progressing positively. During these sessions, the therapist probed my wife about her reasons for following me, and she also sought my perspective. The therapist delved into why she felt the need to seek relationships outside of our marriage, and why she had the address. Essentially, she was addressing the very concerns that had been troubling me. However, the situation took a turn for the worse, similar to how our marriage had been deteriorating over the past year and a half. Eventually, my wife admitted that her outside partner was someone from her past, a high school boyfriend. There it was, confirmation that she had rekindled a connection with her ex, someone I suspected she might have had a history with even back in high school. They had broken up before anything had happened between them, but then they had reconnected. This revelation came with the admission that she had regretted not pursuing a more intimate relationship with him during their high school years and now wanted to fulfill that desire. I was furious. I pointed out that if her concern was that my choice of a mom from our kids' school was too close to home, her choice of a married ex-boyfriend was entirely unacceptable. This is where she might attempt to twist the narrative and paint me as the villain. I expressed my anger by telling her I needed space and checked into a hotel to cool off because I didn't want my children to witness me in such a state. I stayed at the hotel for a few days and then decided to return home and address the remaining issues in our marriage. Upon returning home, I noticed that my 14-year-old daughter was unusually distant and indifferent towards me. Her attitude was particularly dismissive. When I asked what might be bothering her, she unleashed her frustration, accusing me of cheating on her mom with another mom figure. This is a classic example of how a person can steer the narrative in a certain direction. She had gone back home and conveyed a skewed version of events to the kids, making it seem like I was the one at fault. I pressed her to reveal the source of this information, and initially she refused to disclose it, claiming it didn't matter. However, she eventually admitted that her mother had informed her that I was staying at my girlfriend's house. After taking a moment to collect my thoughts, I mentally counted to 10, reassured her that it wasn't true, and showed her the hotel receipt on my phone. I explained that her mother and I had a disagreement, and I needed some space to cool off. Eventually, we both managed to calm down. My daughter was quite emotional, shedding many tears, but I reassured her of my love and commitment to her. It's crucial to take care of your children and provide them with reassurance in such situations. I did my best to maintain my composure, even though I was seething with anger inside. It's essential to keep your cool in these circumstances, guys. If you lose your cool, your kids might get upset too. Instead of directly confronting my wife, I turned to Facebook and found the husband of the woman my wife had an affair with. I messaged him, letting him know that his wife had been involved with my wife for a year and a half. I offered to provide any evidence to confirm it. She appreciated the information and had her own suspicions about her husband's actions. Now, we're about to see some drama with this guy's wife. A few hours later, my wife approached me in anger, accusing me of violating the confidentiality of our therapy sessions and ruining this man's life. Honestly, this guy deserved it, and she might secretly be pleased because she probably wanted him anyway. I asked her why she told our daughter I had a girlfriend. She denied it and claimed she only mentioned that I was away for a few days. It's amazing how convincingly she can lie and deny. Clearly, our daughter heard it from her. This incident happened last Thursday, and we haven't communicated since. Even though we had another counseling session scheduled for tomorrow, I'm starting to doubt if it's worth attending. Dude, it's not worth it. I keep catching her in lies, and rebuilding trust seems impossible. I understand that filing for divorce is the right step at this point. It's a tough decision, considering all the challenges I've faced. I can't help but feel like a failure, because I couldn't save my marriage. No, she wouldn't make the marriage work. I know it's where it's headed, but it makes me feel sick every time I think about contacting an attorney. And that wraps up his story. It came to an abrupt halt. I checked for more updates, but there weren't any, so it was obviously done with her. Anyhow, guys, once again, look at all the challenges this man endured before finally arriving at the conclusion he should have reached from the start, a decision all of us would have made immediately. I get that he didn't want to disrupt his family and the kids, but the situation has only gotten worse. The truth about his daughter is out, and I'm sure more will come to light. Why stay in a relationship with someone who doesn't love you, can't be trusted, and consistently portrays everything you say and do as unfair? When you have a legitimate complaint or issue, she labels you as insecure or controlling. Life is too short. By the way, the guy's 37 years old with plenty of life ahead of him. Yes, he might face financial setbacks in the divorce, given that she was a stay-at-home mom for all those years. But you know what? A man can start anew, turn things around, and be fine because her best years are behind her. I'd bet that her ex, with whom she was involved, isn't about to leave his wife. That guy's wife might leave him, but he'll likely pursue her. Her prime is over, but this guy's prime is just beginning. In his 30s, he has time on his side. He needs to learn to be more assertive and not tolerate any nonsense in the future, because he's obviously a guy who values relationships. This once again shows that open marriages don't work, and it's a mistake to accept them. The moment she brings up the idea, it's over because she doesn't love you. No woman who loves her man would want to subject him to this or share him with someone else. They're either already cheating with someone else or have someone else in mind. It's just not a good idea, which is why I cover stories like these quite often.